You said you have something planned for Halloween there, Kris. What's happening with the CTF and Halloween?
So the national debt is super scary because it's something crazy now. It's like $1.2 trillion. It would take you like 30,000 years to count a trillion. So we're bringing the debt clock, which is super scary, to Calgary. And then a friend of mine, the prairie director, Gage Hobrick, he's coming with me, and we're going to dress up in our best Halloween gear, and we're going to put on like a big press conference about how scary the debt is. So I've got my best witch hat. It has like gold and green undertones. It really brings out my natural witchiness. So I'm really looking forward to that. Are you
I
guys
think,
doing Halloweeny things? What are you doing?
well, I was going to add, I think that the debt keeps Canadians up at night, but I doubt it keeps Trudeau up
No.
much.
No.
No, he. I would say Canadians have had a lot of tricks from this Liberal government and precious few treats in terms of at least cost of living and keeping life affordable. Certainly, my life doesn't seem any more affordable. I haven't gotten a lot of treats from this Liberal government.
Well, in no time flat, people who aren't trick-or-treaters are going to be doing a lot of door knocking. So he should keep all of that in mind. All right, let's get this thing started. Welcome to Off the Record here at True North. My name is Kris Sims. I'm the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Our friends at True North have been very nice to let me host a few of these shows. I'm here with my good friends, Cosmin and William. Thank you both for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here, Kris. Thanks for
Thanks,
having us.
Chris.
It's been quite the week for anyone who is a political nerd. It was a big showdown leading up to the caucus meeting on Wednesday. And quite often, I find fans of True North will come up to me at events and they'll say something like, "We really want the inside scoop, like explain how these things work." So just give me one little second here. So I worked on Parliament Hill for way too long. And one of the main things they do each week when the House is in session, so when all the members of Parliament, 300 something of them, are all in Ottawa, every Wednesday morning from around 8:30ish till around 11:30ish, sometimes later, Wednesday morning, each party goes into these rooms by themselves, usually with no phones even allowed, and they lock themselves in, and that's usually where they can hash things out. Like if you think your leader's being stupid, if you're hearing from your constituents about something crazy that you don't want to get out, but you want people to know, that's called caucus meeting. And so, by the way, as a little aside, which was a very sad anniversary for the passing of Corporal Nathan Cirillo, that is why that terrorist, that attacker, picked Wednesday morning.
Mm-hmm.
Because he knew where they were all going to be. And so that is why you had that stark image of back then Prime Minister Stephen Harper's caucus on one side of the hallway, and then at the time, the opposition's NDP across the hall. They were all in caucus, so they were all in one place in one time. So fast forward to this past Wednesday, this is a really critical meeting for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, because we were hearing all sorts of things. Things like there was going to be a rebellion within caucus, that enough Liberal members of Parliament were going to take the microphone and stand up and be heard and speak back to Trudeau on things like affordability and on things like the carbon tax. At least that's what we were hoping. So there was an awful lot of fireworks going in and out of the building. And so I just wanted very briefly to get your impression first, and then we'll go to the clips. William, what was your take on this? Did you think this turned into a nothing burger? Do you think there's still some fire there?
Yeah, I mean, politically, I think the Prime Minister came out of it about as well as he could have hoped for. He seems more or less to be in the same position he was going in, except maybe even a little bit better. Maybe some of the deflate in the sales of the Dump Trudeau movement, because they don't appear to have made much damage in ousting the Prime Minister. And I think we'll see a clip in just a bit where you can even see a pretty cocky walking Prime Minister as he leaves that caucus meeting. And it's quite telling when you get to see our Prime Minister on full peacock display.
We have to watch that now. You've teased it so well. Let's roll that clip. This is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau emerging from the caucus meeting. I will point out, an hour later than people were expecting. So that was a long grind of a caucus meeting. Watch this.
Trudeau. Heads up, heads up. Is the caucus united behind you?
The Liberal Party is strong and united.
So that's quite the clip. He is a theater kid. So fellow theater kid here, you know your body language, and you know blocking, and you know what you want to portray. And so there, I think he was trying to show His sleeves rolled up. He was cool, calm, and collected, and confident. Cosmin, what was your take on this meeting?
Yeah, definitely. He's definitely trying to portray a sense of confidence and assurance to other members in his party that he's got things under control. But it doesn't address the fact that most Canadians are looking at this government as if they're not serving their interests and they're not able to pull together. Because you still see these signs of rebellion within at least a significant, I think I've heard numbers up to 40 Liberal MPs who don't have confidence in Trudeau. So he must have some key supporters who are able to keep him there in place. But whether that's actually going to translate to things working out for Canadians, I don't think so.
One of the key issues that we were trying to push them to speak up about, and we know for a fact that these members of parliament, particularly in the Liberal caucus, were getting flooded with emails, hundreds, if not thousands per emails saying, get rid of this carbon tax, for example. And quite often when you get enough constituents pushing an MP saying, hey, buddy, your job's on the line because I'm not going to vote for you next time unless you wake up on this stuff, that's when you get them nervous. And that's when you get them speaking up in caucus. So as of right now for tape time, we're about 24 hours out of the caucus meeting. In my experience being a journalist on Parliament Hill, now is kind of the time. So the members of Parliament who had their say or didn't have slept on it. They've thought about it a little bit more. They might be gathering together in like secret meetings at the pub over on Spark Street or something. And they might be gathering courage to speak up. William, do you think that there's still some legs to this? Do you think that they still might find a way of pushing? Because there was this document apparently that was going around. I haven't seen it, of getting them to sign basically a pledge of I will stand up to Trudeau, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to say to a journalist off the record that you want to see the prime minister gone and you think he's doing a terrible job. It's another thing to actually stand up in a caucus room and become publicly identified as an enemy of the prime minister, who continues to wield an awful lot of power in our system. One of the things I think Canadians and other political watchers are going to be curious about is, what promises did the Prime Minister make when he was in caucus to his MPs in order to try and keep them on board? Did he promise staff changes? Did he promise changes on some policies? Are we going to see the end of the carbon tax before the next election? I mean, I know all of us here would be thrilled if we saw that carbon tax go. But of course, that was sort of his signature policy. So, that would be a real defeat for this prime minister. And the other one is, the last time he encountered some real trouble, he dropped Gerald Butts, at least formally, from his office staff. I still suspect they stay in pretty close communication since they were best friends for decades. I know there's a lot of growing resentment about Katie Telford, the current chief of staff to the prime minister. And, one of the reasons you have staff is so you can fire them when things get rough. And I'm curious to see if we're going to see any policy or personnel changes coming out of the wake of this caucus meeting.
Maybe cabinet. Maybe he'll do a cabinet shuffle or add a few more cabinet appointments, dangle some of those goodies, because cabinet ministers, so your average backbencher, member of parliament, makes just over $200,000. You're a cabinet minister, you're adding like another $100,000 onto that typically. So those folks are not hurting. So I'm keeping a very close eye on all this stuff. It was really interesting. So I was there when there was a press conference, and then Finance Minister Paul Martin kind of sort of indicated that he didn't have full confidence, and then Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. Then all hell broke loose. Like we've said before, things happened gradually and then all of a sudden. So it really kind of felt rolling into this caucus meeting like that all of a sudden could be happening, because we saw some signals coming from Mark Carney, for example, musing about his future in politics, and then a really strong one coming from former BC Liberal British Columbia Premier Christy Clark. And it was the weirdest announcement. It was just like, I'm not running for leader of the Liberal Party. It's the strangest thing. And so that would be really interesting if she wanted to make that move, because again, if one of the albatrosses around Trudeau's neck is the carbon tax, It was the BC Liberals that invented the darn thing in all of North America. And that was under, including then Christy Clark's watch. It was Gordon Campbell before her, but she kept it going. So that would be really interesting to see if they could fit that into that narrative box. We had a clip. And so we have a clip here of a member of parliament, Liberal member of parliament from Atlantic Canada. And this is where reporters kind of stake out the entrances of the building as they're going into the caucus meeting and coming out of the caucus meeting. So it was a field day for the press gallery. I saw a lot of them getting their workout in yesterday. Sorry, my apologies to our dear True North watchers. So this is a screen grab of the actual story. If I mistook that it was a clip. But here we have a question of whether or not they could vote to topple the government, and saying that it's actually not out of the question. And this is coming from Liberal Member of Parliament Ken McDonald. And the reason why that's significant is that he's apparently not seeking re-election. So he feels more entitled or maybe liberated to be able to speak about that. Cosmin, did you want to jump in here again to figure out, to let people know where your stance is on this? Do you think this still has legs, or do you think this is going to be put to bed? They're going to have a long break over Christmas?
For sure. I'm glad that you mentioned that Ken McDonald is not seeking re-election, because we have so many Liberal MPs who are refusing to run again under the Liberal Party banner. And you also mentioned the prospects of a cabinet shuffle. We actually have a cabinet shuffle coming because another minister also said she won't be seeking re-election, and that was former agriculture minister. I forgot what her latest role was, but it was Marie-Claude Bibeau, who said she won't be running for the Liberals again. We've also seen Seamus O'Regan not want to run for the Liberals again. So I think there needs to be more attention paid to that, because it is a sort of unspoken way of signaling to voters that you don't want to participate in this party, or at least you don't have any hopes that there are future prospects for you to be reelected.
Great point there. Did we want to move on to the CBC? Speaking of broadcasters and Seamus O'Regan. So Seamus was backstory again. Seamus was at CTV for a long time, as particularly at Canada AM, and I was the parliamentary producer for Canada AM. So I worked quite closely with Mr. O'Regan before he jumped into politics, and I didn't know that he was part of Justin Trudeau's wedding party at the time. So let's shift over to our other favorite broadcaster that takes government money, the CBC. So Catherine Tait, she's the president and CEO of the CBC. People might remember her from past performances at the committee. So again, on Parliament Hill, there's various committees in each separate room, and on different days, they'll have different meetings. And one of these committees is the Heritage Committee. The Heritage Committee is the one that grills Catherine Tait whenever enough members of Parliament on that committee are mad about things like pay and bonuses. So this time around, she was called to the committee carpet again to answer for the fact that last year they handed out about $18 million in bonus money. This is not just pay. This is bonus money. And so she had to face down quite a few questions, things like, are we getting good value for money? I just wanted to go around the horn on this first, just to get both of your impressions of her appearance at committee. William, you and I are both old enough to remember that it was pretty rare to see somebody from the CBC up that high being asked such impertinent questions. And now we're kind of getting the front row seat lately.
Yeah, every time I watch Ms. Tate come before the committee and answer questions, I secretly think, is she really on the side of the defunders? Because you couldn't have asked for a better CEO to be the poster child for why we need to cut funding to CBC. The level of arrogance and of being out of touch with everyday Canadians is so breathtaking that it borders on almost implausible. You do have to think, is she secretly got money from, I don't know, True North to appear before a committee just to tank the CBC? I can say, as our chief operating officer, we are not paying Catherine Tait. So,
but it would be money well spent, just saying, because she's doing a great job. Yeah.
Honestly, it is just so hard to believe when you watch her, the sheer tone deafness of her responses.
Cosmin, what was your take on it after watching some of this?
Well, it was a sense of almost a lack of self-awareness that I got from everything she says. Anytime she's at committee, she blames everybody else except for CBC's own performance. their obvious bias. I mean, this is a network that sued the Conservative Party unsuccessfully. They are constantly demeaning Canadians, demeaning the values of working class people, and looking down their noses in their reporting. And so it just strikes me like she's on her way out. She's already, a replacement has already been named. And there might be some truth to that. Maybe she's just burning bridges. Maybe she's just burning everything on her way out.
It was quite the performance. And so to give folks some numbers, because full disclosure, I did work at the CBC for a very brief time, around 6 weeks or so. I have no personal axe to grind. People there were nice to me. It was in the Ottawa Bureau. This is about, for the Taxpayers Federation, money and conflict of interest. Because number one, this is a huge waste of money for a network that next to nobody watches. And two, it is a conflict of interest for journalists to be paid by the government. Like, to have to say that out loud is kind of weird. So for those two huge reasons of waste of money and major accountability issues, the CTF is one of the ones right in the ring fighting this. So to go by the numbers really briefly before we get to Catherine Tait's clip, because they are spellbinding, the CBC this year is costing taxpayers $1.4 billion. To put that into perspective, that kind of money could instead pay the full-time salaries of 7,000 paramedics and 7,000 cops this year. That kind of money is the equivalent of more than 80,000 households' income taxes. So the next time she tries to say, oh, it's only costing a few dollars per Canadian. No. 80,000 homes, not people, homes. Picture that. That is the federal income tax bill every year going to this organization. It is an astonishing amount of money. And for the lady you are about to watch, this is CBC CEO and President Catherine Tait. Her salary would choke a horse. She is paid more than the Prime Minister of Canada. For anybody who's picking up on this as a journalist, if you're looking it up, she is under the Crown Corporation drop-down tab. She is CEO level 7. That means she's paid between $468,000 and $551,000 per year. She's entitled to a bonus of 28%. That bonus alone, guys, is up to $154,000. Her bonus is more than what the average two-person family makes in a year. So listen to this first clip here.
Ms. Tate, you said that it's confidential, that information, but that just doesn't work for Canadians. Canadians look at $18 million awarded in bonuses, the fact that you just spent $1,000 a night for a hotel room in Paris during the Olympics, and we are in a situation where you are coming to the conclusion of your term being paid more than the Prime Minister of this country makes, and you refuse today to rule out that you will receive either bonuses or so-called performance pay or a severance package at the conclusion of your term. It's confidential, doesn't cut it for Canadians. It doesn't cut it for parliamentary oversight. So again, I ask, will you specifically today share with this committee whether or not you will refuse a severance package or bonus at the conclusion of your term as President and CEO of CBC?
As I've said, I consider that to be a personal matter. And
So-
I believe I'm protected by the Privacy Act in that regard.
So again, gentlemen, to both of your points, that sounds an awful lot like I'm entitled to my entitlements.
Very much so. You know, a small petty part of me did wonder, for someone who's so highly paid, you think she could have afforded a better dye job on that sparkly red hair of hers.
Look at you, sassy, today.
I'm sorry. I just
I felt it's okay.
you see her hair and you wonder every single time she chose that color. No, I mean, $1,000 a night for her to go to the Paris Olympics. To the best of my knowledge, she wasn't competing on behalf of Team Canada. And so why was she there? You know, why are we paying a bonus to someone who has overseen a massive decline in the viewership of CBC, in the audience, the revenue, the reach, and the influence of CBC? More Canadians than ever have said They do not watch CBC. They do not trust its news reporting. They do not believe CBC journalists are fair and impartial. And so bonuses generally are given out to people who exceed expectations. It is to be given on top of a salary in recognition of a job well done. Rarely is it given to celebrate failure, but that seems to be the CBC's approach to bonuses.
I have some fresh, hard data on their viewership, which was astonishing to me. I can get to that in a second, but I wanted to get Cosmin's thoughts in on that clip.
You know, for an organization that you would think values things like transparency and being forthcoming with Canadians, they're not transparent at all. They're not transparent about who gets bonuses, how much bonuses are divvied out. They're also not transparent about what targets they're actually meeting to achieve these bonuses. We're talking about an organization that's on the decline. You're going to bring up some stats. They're losing viewers, they're losing advertisers, yet they're awarding themselves for what?
Yeah, big time. So I've got some stats here. Forgive me while I read them off my phone, but it's coming out in an op-ed very soon in the newspaper, but the numbers are astonishing. So very quickly, Tate says that Canadians are seeing good value for money, but how can we know if nobody's actually watching it? So CBC News Network's share of primetime is 1.7%. That's lower than it was last time we checked. So put another way, 98.3% of TV viewing Canadians are choosing to not watch it. So that is the news side. And if you want to say, okay, well, what about, the comedy drama, right? What about the arts side of things, the fiction side of things, right? That's terrible too. So on the entertainment side, they're not ranking highly either. Their top rated show is a show called The Murdoch Mysteries, which is not produced by the CBC. That is produced by a private company in Toronto. They just air it. They have the biggest audience for that one. It's about 800,000 people. It's 1.9% of the population. And what was astonishing to me is that Tate, during the committee, actually said, well, if we didn't have programming like the wonderful show Son of a Critch, it would be, bad, like basically for the world, is what she was implying. So I got curious and I looked up the ratings for Son of a Critch, which is based off of the government-paid comedian Mark Critch's life. And it's in its third season. Who knew? But you paid for it. So I looked up how much that total is. Where are we here? So last year, that audience was around 590,000 people. About 1.4% of Canadians are watching that show that the CEO just mentioned out loud with her face in committee as being essential. And one of her other things that she said under questioning about why she went to the Paris Olympics is that, get this, she was already there, guys. She was already there vacationing in France, of course, as one does. And so she just popped into Paris because she thought that Canadians would be really concerned if she wasn't there.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I'm up nights wondering where President and CEO of CBC Catherine Tait is. Also, I've never seen Son of a Critch. I'm now thinking how much enriched my life would be if I had watched 3 seasons about a mediocre comedian who few Canadians could pick out of a police lineup. My favorite CBC programming story is, I would say, CBC legitimately deserves credit for Schitt's Creek, mostly because they did it in partnership with the private sector. And the private sector had this impossible or crazy idea that they should produce a television show that people actually want to watch in the world. And so after it was done, you would have thought CBC would have looked at that and said, wow, we produced a popular piece of entertainment, or at least we were marginally part of it, in partnership with Netflix. That was great. Well, no, actually what they said was, well, we'll never do that again. They lamented the commercial nature of that partnership, the fact that it appealed broadly outside of Canada to an American audience, where there's 330 million people who like to watch TV. And so I just love it. A one tiny example of CBC success. And they said, well, let's never do that again.
Isn't it sad? And so I'm not an art critic. At least, well, I am privately, but I'm not paid to be an art critic. I like pictures of horses, right? That's not my thing. But if people want to produce obscure, weird art for whatever reason, and however they want to do it, however many people they want to see it or not, that's great. Pay for it yourself. Like, pay for it yourself, or do a GoFundMe, or get a sponsor. Get people to willingly pay for the art that you want to produce. But you cannot produce weird stuff that people aren't actually watching if you're using taxpayers' money. And I have to read you her actual quote, because it's almost too hard to believe. She said, without a show like Son of a Critch, it would, quote, be a huge impoverishment of our status and our place on the world stage. Like, wow. So again, this lady makes probably over $500,000, and her bonus that she's entitled to is likely more than what a 2-person working family pays. So I wanted to take this moment to make a fun announcement. So we finally have these bumper stickers printed. It says, for folks just listening, it's Defund the CBC. It's a bumper sticker. It's black, red, and white. We have these done. I have the box upstairs. I'm going to be giving them out at True North Nation coming up this Saturday. So I imagine that they're going to be pretty popular. And you're both right. She is really making a solid argument as to why we need to defund the CBC. Did we want to get to our other story here about, this was a Parks Canada story, Cosmin, that you had? Do you want to move on to there?
Yeah, that's right. Parks Canada is about to undergo an apology tour. They've flagged 27 different national parks across the country, including Banff, including Pacific Rim, Jasper as well, to apologize for the department's role, its supposed role in colonialism and all of this damage that has caused, supposedly. And it's astounding to me because Parks Canada preserves natural sites. Why is the Canadian government, why do they think that we need to apologize for preserving the environment, creating spaces that everybody can enjoy, First Nations, everybody can enjoy these spaces? So we came across this story because we filed an ATIP, and it was actually at the tail end of this 800-page document. They had this map laid out with all of the locations that they plan on having place-based apologies. Now, I'm not 100% sure exactly what that means because Parks Canada wasn't very forthcoming when I asked them for comment and clarification. But the first location flagged for this apology tour was Jasper. And this was supposed to happen before, it was determined before the wildfires actually broke out, those devastating wildfires that destroyed a huge part of this town and the surrounding area and impacted the national park itself. But there was supposed to be a exhibit opening this September, which was delayed. So it still remains to be the first place that they want to initiate this apology tour. But Kris, I want to turn it to you in specifically with regards to the potential costs of starting exhibits, sending government officials, all of the consulting that goes behind these procedures, and something so grandiose as touching the entire country. 27 parks is a huge number.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how much that costs, because Parks Canada has been amazing at wasting money. Like, folks might remember very recently where, forget how much money we wasted. I think it was tons and tons of money. Hiring sharpshooters from overseas to shoot deer out of a helicopter on some tiny little Gulf island off British Columbia. I'm already getting all these alarm bells from so many people who live in that area going, what? Why? Wait. So I will definitely look into how much that is costing, because I bet you it's a spectacular amount of money. And just to say, the Taxpayers Federation, we try to help everybody out. And we hear from First Nations people all the time. They want the same thing that everybody else does, living in smaller towns included, like really good accountable government, nice, safe, clean drinking water, good schools for their kids. I have not had one email saying, you know what keeps me up at night is making sure that I get this paid for and all done by the government and bureaucrats involved. Like, this just seems like such a personal, strange thing. William, what was your take on this?
Well, look, Parks Canada should show up in Jasper and apologize, but they should apologize for allowing a huge chunk of the town to burn down because of their terrible policies in that regard. They dropped the ball on maintaining anti-fire provisions. They weren't clearing away the dead brush that had been recommended. They were silencing internal criticism of their policy. They did not work as full partners in the fighting of the fire, turning down resources that were available to them because they were playing fiefdom over that particular area. So the people of Jasper, the people of Alberta, and the people of Canada all deserve apologies from Parks Canada, but it's because of their sheer incompetence that allowed a jewel like Jasper to be consumed by flame rather than a anti-colonial feel-good park nonsense tour that they seem to be planning instead.
That I just don't see people rallying in the streets asking for. Like, really, people are worried about being able to afford groceries and their heat bill. Like, it's just mind-boggling. You had another real head-scratcher there, William. What was this story coming out of a med school in Toronto? I just saw the headline of it.
Yeah, every once in a while you run into a news story that you have to read at least twice in order to make sure that either it isn't a parody or that what you're reading is actually true. And in the case of Toronto Metropolitan University, which I think most people still remember as Ryerson University.
Oh, okay. I didn't understand where it was. Sorry.
Until Toronto Metropolitan University decided that it wanted to be Canada's wokest university. And as part of that, they are opening a new medical school. But this new medical school is going to be for racialized, Indigenous, and quote unquote, equity deserving applicants. And in case you're wondering what an equity deserving applicant is, I have a list. It is racialized people, racialized immigrants, and children of racialized immigrants, people with disabilities, neurodivergence, or those living with chronic health conditions, people who identify as part of the 2SLGBTQ plus community, or gender or sexual minority. So that's their target for their new medical school. That means that of the 94 positions they're opening, 75% of them are being held for those specific groups. Only 25% are going to be made available to the student population at large. They're also doing a couple other things that I think people will find interesting. The normal GPA needed to get into a medical school is 3.9 out of 4. I mean, medical school is a tough gig. There's a joke why so many parents want their children to go become doctors. It's a hard gig to get. But for these equity deserving applicants, they'll only need a GPA of 3.3. So far below what non-equity group applicants are going to need. But they also will have to, right here it says, a 500 to 1,000 word essay about their identity as members of those groups in order to be considered for application. So the concern, of course, being when you go to a doctor, it's usually under some pretty difficult circumstance. You're either injured, sick, could be facing a life-threatening condition. You expect your doctor to know everything there is to know about your body, about your medical treatment, and about medicine in general. You don't expect them to kind of know it, and you don't expect them to have gotten into the program and become a doctor because of some personal characteristic that represents on them. I mean, my question for, I think, both of you is, if you found out that your doctor went to medical school as a diversity candidate rather than one based on merit, would you have concerns about that particular doctor?
Well, so I'm a huge Star Trek fan. Like, I don't care if you're a purple Klingon. I want you to be really, really good at your job. Like, no, straight up. Like, I do not care. What I desperately care about is merit, because that has results, because that is what determines a good outcome or a bad outcome in most things, not just medicine. But in this case, you'd be directly affecting patients and their families. And again, there's an accountability level here of we all pay for healthcare in Canada. Taxpayers do. We all do. So again, I always go back to this, folks, if you don't like this, contact your member of parliament and let them know that you're opposed to something like this. Cosmin, go ahead there.
The other consequences of this is that it actually harms the credibility of the entire industry itself, the entire medical profession. When you are causing doubt within patients about the competence of their doctors because of programs like this introduced by universities, probably encouraged by diversity, equity, inclusion departments, and it doesn't really it doesn't give the sense that this is rooted in actual problems, and these initiatives don't address the endemic issues that Canadian healthcare has with retaining doctors, hiring doctors. We shouldn't lower our standards. We should make it more desirable to become a doctor in Canada.
I just have to think, if I was a student, I had worked so hard in my undergraduate. I put in all of that extra time and effort. I have a 4.0 GPA. I have a lifelong dream of going to medical school. But then I find out that actually the position that I would have earned under the merit approach to choosing doctors was given away to someone less qualified with less skills, less knowledge, and less ability for an entirely superficial personal characteristic beyond their control. It would be maddening to do that. And what message are you sending to university students where it says how you were born is more important than your ability and work ethic when it comes to your career? I just think what an awful message we're sending to young people, and potentially now a very dangerous one too, if we're going to end up with a bunch of medical professionals who really aren't as qualified as they could or should be.
I am an eternal optimist, again, why I'm a Star Trek fan, and I think if enough people speak up calmly and firmly and genuinely from a position of concern and love, really, and they contact their member of parliament and they say, listen, folks, this is why I oppose this for A, B, and C reasons. I do think that people will change. And I do think that if they want to, they can change an enrollment policy like this. So I just want to encourage people, don't give up. If you feel like everything's closing in around you, don't, because there's so many people who feel the same way you do. You just need to get off the bench and get into the arena, and you can actually make an amazing amount of change happen. It's one of the reasons we're having our gathering this coming Saturday. So do check out True North Nation. Basically, you get this, but on very good and healthy steroids, if that's a term. And we're all on stage, and we're all there together, and there'll be a booth set up. The Taxpayers Federation will have a booth. I'm not sure who else will be there. There's going to be things like t-shirts and bumper stickers and bracelets and all that fun stuff. And you can meet all your favorite True North personalities and listen to some of us try to make some sense on air. So click the link. There are still apparently a few tickets left, and it's coming up this Saturday in Calgary. William and Cosmin, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, well, thanks for having us. It's always fun.
You bet. And remember, everything is off the record.
You just have to scratch your head over the doctor one. As we were joking a little bit before, there are some jobs where you don't really have to know everything about everything in order to be good at it.
Make it.
I would suggest respectfully that in my job, if I don't fully know something, maybe something doesn't perform as well as it should, or maybe, it doesn't execute as brilliantly as we would have hoped. But very few people die.